Welcome to Suffolk Matters, where all of Suffolk County meets the men and women of Suffolk AME. News, opinions, and insights you won't hear anywhere else. Here's your host, the president of New York's largest independent union, Suffolk AME's Dan Levler.
Welcome to another edition of Suffolk Matters on Walk 97.5 and 94.3 The Shark, where Suffolk County meets the men and women of Suffolk AME. News and views you can't hear anywhere else. So my guest this morning is Nick De Bello. He is a vice president of Suffolk AME, and we're going to catch up on, what 2020 has been for us. Good morning, Nick.
Good morning, Dan. How are you?
So as I touched on, we work together, obviously, officers of Suffolk AME. We represent, about 6,000 active government employees, another 4,000 or so retired, most of which stay in the state of New York. New York, obviously, being, in the early days of coronavirus, it's like almost ground zero in a sense. We had a big upswing in the amount of cases. And it really, it fell to our members to step in with all the uncertainty that was going on with COVID in the world and people not knowing, can you get it from services? Do you, how do you get it? And what happens if you do? Nobody knew what to do. Lots of people staying home, things shutting down. Your government can't do that. Your government has to be there at a time of greater need. You almost need more government to step in and fill the gap. And our members came in. They handled everything they had to. If there were functions that they normally would handle that because of coronavirus, those functions throttled back, they were volunteering and finding ways to help in other areas. So, I guess it's worth, just you and I, because we have such different functions in the union and how our jobs, sometimes intersect and other times we're very divergent. I just want to get your thoughts on, what you've noticed.
Yeah, I think it's incredible. A number of members have stepped up in so many ways, so many various different departments. First thing that comes to mind is custodians. We have these guys who are so understaffed to begin with, working at numerous different buildings, making sure everything is nice and clean. But now all of a sudden they've been tasked with disinfecting and making sure high-touch areas are disinfected to make sure our members who are doing their jobs
And the public.
sick, and the public. I think of the health department and the work they've been doing. Their public health nurses, people in purchasing, right? We take for granted that these masks just magically pop up for the members of the community, for our members at work, for county employees. Our members are tasked with making sure here's a budget, let's stay within that budget, and doing that. And they've done so successfully, which is a win for the taxpayers, because if something gets messed up in those purchase orders, all of a sudden now you got to expend and use more money to right that wrong. So,
and they were making those supplies available to government workers, but also hospitals, nursing homes, where supplies were needed. Suffolk County government was using its resources and its buying power and its influence in the world to make sure that the resources came into Suffolk County and got distributed out to where they needed to. And those were AME members driving the bus on that.
Absolutely. And it's not something where you could just go online and say, hey, let me purchase from this company, because there were a million mask companies that popped up out of nowhere when COVID happened. So there's a lot of research that goes in to make sure that the business that you're doing business with is reputable and will actually honor the orders that you're making. So our guys, tremendous effort to make sure they purchase these masks, and tremendous effort on our members to make sure they were dispersed correctly.
Sure, and I just want to go back to the custodial issue. It's just not one of those things that people think about, immediately in terms of when you're thinking the world changed because of COVID, and what a first responder is changed because of that. And you don't think about the custodial crew, but the health and safety of the people who provide government services to the county and the resources that everybody relies on, that was being handled first by custodial.
Absolutely.
Right? And to the extent that, maybe they were, going in and maybe, I don't know, wiping down some surfaces, getting some garbage pails emptied, making sure that, floors were clean and doing regular maintenance cleanup, that's all out the window. Now they're doing medical grade cleanups. Doorknobs, light switches, headsets, all surfaces, and doing that with a department that has seriously been depleted since, 2012. They've probably got about a third of the amount of people. So when we look at the budget, the county executive's proposed budget that the Suffolk County Legislature is reviewing now and considering making changes to, they note in several areas where there are departments that, because of COVID, their workload went through the roof. Easy example, the Labor Department. If they were processing, say, 10,000 claims in May this time last year, or in May of last year, they were up to 60,000 claims in May of 2020. All of a sudden, the workload has increased exponentially. And the same is true of these custodial workers. They can only do so much in their normal shift, but what's required of them has gone through the roof.
Oh, absolutely. And it's not just our AME members that are working for the county. We also have the custodial workers at the college.
Yes, we do.
So, the college has been open. Enrollment is, while it declined slightly, I think it's fairly close to what they projected it to be. You couldn't have your professors and your adjuncts there if it weren't for our guys making sure the buildings were safe to go to.
And therefore the students, and enrollment's still being done to some extent in person. And, to be able to do that safely on behalf of the workforce is very important, but also the members of the public. Suffolk Community College has 3 different campuses, and there's 3 different, sets of demographics that they have to consider there, and everyone has to be safe. The workers have to be safe. The students have to be safe. And, again, getting back to the government offices is the same thing. When you've got to interact with your government because that is the only way you're going to survive. And there's tons of services. I mean, we can get into social services and all that they do and how reliant people who thought they would never, ever in their lifetime ever have to touch a social service program, now relying on that social service program to stay, in their house, provide for their kids, and so all things considered, the coronavirus brought change, and it brought change in a number of ways, and it increased workloads in areas where you would expect, and maybe in some areas that that makes sense when you think about it, but you wouldn't initially think of. And again, the custodians being a first responder, in 2019, no one would say a custodian was a first responder. In 2020, it's clearly the case.
No, it's so unique how the world is kind of turned around the way we think. A couple of years ago, it was always police and teachers and education were the people you looked at as
fire, ambulance, and all of that makes a ton of sense.
And now you're looking at examiners, caseworkers still. You're looking at custodians, to your point, public health nurses, epidemiologists is something we've talked about.
Crucial. In a pandemic, epidemiologists are crucial. Yes.
Yeah. Look at our tracers now, and that's something I'm really proud of. Is the amount of members who have volunteered for those programs to work them, to make sure when there are clusters, they trace so we can prevent more of a spread. And I think they've done a great job identifying when there is a positive. They've jumped right into action. They've done their responsibilities. They've made their calls, and we've seen the containment because of that work.
And you've heard me talk many times about the altruism of what a public worker, exhibits every single day. But, when this pandemic happened, rather than shutting down and saying, I don't want to go anywhere where I can't be 100% certain that I and my family are safe, they behaved more like firemen, right? Police officers and like saying, where am I needed? Where am I needed? The community needs government. We know the community needs government. The thing that I do is helpful, but we're not doing that now because of coronavirus. Put me somewhere else.
Yeah, and you look at the services we provide. You referenced earlier, with DSS, whether you need housing or food stamps, and I'm thinking recently of our public health nurses. There's a number of, there used to be 4 methadone clinics in Suffolk County. Currently now there's only 2. So obviously there's an influx of people who had more of an opportunity to go somewhere else to one of these 2 centralized locations. Right. Our public health nurses are going in extra early. They're getting the machines ready to work. It takes about a half an hour to prep them up. They're staying longer so they can clean the machines, because obviously you want to keep the clients healthy and, potentially keep them away from any kind of contagious, COVID.
Sure.
So there's a lot of work that goes into this, and our guys have stepped up. I mean, literally just, where can I be, right? We think of the firefighter.
Right.
They're the first ones in. Everybody else is running out. Our guys are now the first ones going in to the proverbial fire.
Sure. So now, you bring up the methadone clinic, and we're talking COVID and we're talking about government workers, but there is a fiscal component, obviously, to what COVID did because of the need to choke down on things that people could do, because social distancing, mask wearing, all of those things were shown as effective in preventing this virus. We're seeing numbers spike across the country to almost double where it was in July. I mean, the latest numbers that we heard was somewhere in 120,000 mark, and July was hovering around 70,000. This is not unexpected. This is what was predicted by the CDC. But you have that economic crunch, and when you have that lack of resources in a given household, people look to deal with their stress, and they deal with it all in different ways. And you're finding now that there are people that, just like there are people who thought they would never, ever in their life have to go for SNAP benefits to get those food stamps that are doing it. There are people that are, turning to substance abuse as a way to cope, as a coping mechanism, and they need that help. And, you talk about, Suffolk County previously having a number of clinics, and that number has been reduced, but the workload's going up. And the fact of the matter is you're going to see that all over the place. And again, another aspect of first responders, let's call it. When the economy and the economics of a region start going bad, crime starts spiking, right? And the first thing you think of with crime, you would say, okay, well, we need those first responders that we traditionally think of to go in and deal with that. But there are programs in place to prevent that from happening in the first place, right? DSS is a stopgap measure, a way to prevent people from having to make desperate choices that could affect them and their families for life. It is a way to make sure that they have the resources necessary to not have to make those choices. So there is a first response before the crime happens, right? So, and that really is the interconnectivity of what it is all of your government does.
No, absolutely. With COVID going on and so many people being homebound, some of them because they lost their employment, others because they were fortunate enough where maybe they could work from home, you have seen that spike in substance abuse or mental health problems, and DSS is that stopgap. There are resources out there for people to utilize to get help before that thing that might have been a problem actually becomes one and realizes out.
Again, a dark subject, but domestic abuse. You want to be sure that everything is in place to make sure that there isn't elder abuse, that there isn't child abuse. These issues tend to increase in a time of economic uncertainty.
Yeah, and that's, and now I'm thinking of our dispatchers, our 911 operators. You need people to answer those phones who have been well rested in addition to well trained, right? So if they're understaffed and they're working so many hours, you need these personnel or this personnel to be on top of their games when they're taking that call, because that worst 1, 2, 3 minutes of your life, they're taking.
That is the first responder.
The very first. And
nobody knows there's a problem until you get an operator on the phone. And from there, that's where all of this stuff gets dispatched out. In addition to that, fire rescue and emergency services. So there are different levels of these operators that have to be in. They have to be sharp. And listen, their job. Everybody knows about getting a bad phone call here and there. All they get is emergency situations every single day, right? They're not in the home, seeing the thing that's happening, or out in the world, wherever the thing that's bad is happening, but they're getting all the emotion. They're getting all of every single day, every single call, the worst moment in someone's life. They need some time to decompress and be fresh and ready to help society the next day.
What's amazing that I've found the last few years, and with Tom Moran, one of our vice presidents also, is the amount of volunteerism from these guys who are hearing the worst calls. So many of them are volunteer firefighters. So many of them are EMS. So it doesn't just stop when the clock stops and you're punching out. They're running into those fires. They're going to the car accidents to help the residents of the community out. I mean, it's incredible.
It's, the sense that I get is if you are by your nature someone who is altruistic, that is looking to help people, to deal with problems bigger than just your own, you're going to gravitate towards these jobs. You are going to be a public worker on some level. You are going to volunteer at a firehouse or a EMS. You're going to, coach Little League. You're going to find ways to get yourself involved and be community involved. And it's not for everyone. I completely understand that. But those people that go out of their way for other people predominantly find themselves in government services.
Oh, absolutely. None of those jobs are 9 to 5, much like what we do for a living. There's no clock that stops at 5. Calls come in at all hours, as you know, and we respond.
Yes.
We take care of business. We help our members out whenever they need it.
This is a 7-day-a-week job for sure. So, I just want to get into a couple of other items in catching up with you. Obviously, Suffolk County has got fiscal concerns. County executive put forward a proposed budget. The legislature is working through that now. And one of the things that was very important for us was to ensure that the adverse effects economically, revenue-wise, for the government to keep the lights on and keep providing services didn't impact our members who came in the worst, darkest days of this pandemic. And that's something that, on my end, I've had a lot of conversations with the legislature, obviously going through, making comments on the record, but also having conversations with them throughout the course of their reviewing of this proposed budget to ensure that we included a clause, which they did this past Thursday, where they included a clause that if additional revenues are realized, if this mess that's going on the federal level, and who will be the next president, what will the composition of the Senate look like? It looks like Congress is fairly stable there, but if the federal government comes in some way and assists, and there are revenue realized over and above what has been budgeted for, the priority has to be to stand with these public workers who stood with the community and provided services at a time where they didn't know what the risk was to themselves. They didn't know what the risk was to their family. They knew that people were staying home, sheltering in place, but they did not. They did not.
Yeah, you can look as close as New Jersey, you can look to our neighbors in the city, and you see how the rates are starting to spike again. When you look at Suffolk County, they're staying fairly stagnant at this point. A lot of that, again, has to do with the workforce that we've discussed, whether it's public education through the health department with our members, whether it's like we talked about with the custodians actually going to the buildings and making sure that they're safe. Our guys are the first stop for making sure this county stays safe, as safe as possible.
And taxpayers shouldn't see a reduction in their services at a time when they need more services.
Absolutely
right?
not.
And economic recovery, right? We've got to consider that. So, we had this downturn because of what happened with COVID and that choke down on the economy. There has to be a recovery effort. And generally speaking, and I've talked about this before, public works was created as a concept to put people to work at a time in a down economy to stimulate the economy. Take people who aren't working at all, put them to work. They buy food. They take care of the necessities and everything else, and that keeps stimulating the economy and stimulating the economy. And what does the public get in return? New roads, new bridges, sewers where there didn't used to be sewers. All of these types of things. So, revenue-generating departments in Suffolk County, which there are a bunch of, need to remain fully staffed. There should be no reduction in that because that's going to put more burden back on the taxpayer. If those revenue-generating departments don't generate the revenue because they don't have the staff necessary to complete their task, then to fill that gap means more taxpayer resources. And that's why I think it was very important. Proposition 2, which was a ballot measure in Suffolk County this year, took money that was sitting in a sewer tax rate stabilization fund and allowed that to be transferred into the taxpayer trust, which essentially allows them to stabilize tax rates across the board as opposed to stabilizing tax rates exclusively for sewers. The money will be retained in the sewer tax stabilization fund to continue stabilizing sewer tax rates, but that excess money, which is significant, can be spent on maintaining the resources of government at a time where you would either have to decline the amount of services you can provide or increase the tax rate people are paying, which people can't afford, right? So, a lot of smart thought went in there and a lot of quick moving around. I know that there has been some talk about, maybe Prop 2 does something bad. It does not. In my past life, I was Assistant Director of Sewer District Activation. I am aware of the fund. I'm aware of what it does. If somebody else from some conservative agency comes along and starts talking about, hey, listen, this affects water quality, he doesn't know and is incorrect.
And when it comes to the services our members provide, whether it's safety or whether it's in a department that generates revenue, child support, parks, real property, these are all essential to keeping the county running. Politics shouldn't be used when it comes to our membership, right? So a lot of people, depending on what side of the pendulum you're on, this is a good idea to move the money. It's a bad idea. It's a bailout. It's not a bailout. It's ensuring our members are continue to receive all the contractually negotiated benefits that they should. They've come to work every single day. They've protected the community. They've brought in money for the county. You don't want to lose any of that.
We're not talking about some crazy cushy gig, though, right? When we talk about the average, your government workers, people tend to get their information from the people who want to highlight why, we need to reduce government. And so the arguments that they make, they take top-tier earners, people that in their retirement are making in excess of $100,000 in pensions, right? AME, the workforce that does all of these services and more that we've talked about this morning, again, 924 some odd job titles on average, their take-home pay is $45,000, $50,000. In retirement, if they're receiving a pension, $30,000, $35,000. We're not talking crazy money. We are talking about people who are doing this for the love of the community that they serve, and not, again, I read the articles. I see the talking points that these people make, and they point to some administrator making $250,000 that banked years worth of vacation or sick time that they want paid out, and then they get this crazy $400,000 payout, and then make it sound like that's how it is for everybody. I can tell you for sure, custodians are not making $100,000, $150,000, $200,000. It's just not happening. This is not what happens for nurses in Suffolk County. This is not what happens in the Department of Social Services, in Public Works. There are all sorts of professional titles that require degrees and certifications and everything else, but government pays in an attempt to be fair. They pay at best, let's call it okay. And that benefits package that you're talking about is making up the difference, and it's being done with smart investing. So it's a value to the public. It's a value to the to the taxpayer, and it gets the public employee by. But we're not talking about that crazy argument. Maybe some folks from the Empire Center would like you to think about.
Yeah, I think oftentimes people lump our membership in with potentially the police or potentially with teachers. And while I believe that every group negotiates and should get whatever they can negotiate and earn, we're not in those categories. We work hand in hand with them. Our crossing guards are at the schools, making sure your kids get in there safely. Obviously, we spoke about our dispatchers, but our maintenance mechanics at all the precincts are making sure those vehicles for the police are safe. They're not making the same money. They're not making a fraction of it.
Not even close. And it isn't really, this isn't a discussion about the race to the bottom. Some particular group of public workers should be making less. It isn't really that discussion. It's always a concern when people bring up, the benefits, that the impression that people get, and generally speaking, the only people willing to speak about benefits that public employees get are the ones who want to take it away. And they make their argument based on those extreme cases of, people earning quite a bit and banking, all of these different benefits for to maximize some sort of payout for them. And they try and make that narrative seem like that's what it is. But your government workforce, again, $55,000, take home pay. I wouldn't even call it take home pay because, in a lot of instances that's pre-tax too. So, our members, our taxpayers, they live in this community as well. And the things that happen inside of government happen to them also.
And I would say to anybody in the community, if we have members who are banking out a certain amount of vacation hours or sick time towards the end, many of our guys have that because staffing is so short. They actually don't have the ability to take those vacations, or they lack the desire to, because if they don't go to work, maybe that kid's not going to get seen in a home. Maybe the food stamps you're requesting aren't going to get processed. There's such a pride in.
The reason you can get those banked hours when you leave is because it was a trade-off early on. While public sector jobs were getting raises, the government didn't want to raise tax rates, and they made this trade-off. We're not going to compensate you more than we did last year, but we will allow you to keep the vacation hours that you should have used in a year, but chose to work and can't, and we'll pay you for them later. That was the trade-off. So it wasn't necessarily again, if you look at a particular job in the private sector and let's say it pays $80,000 and you go to do that same job inside the government and it's paying $55,000, $60,000, you may have a use it or lose it vacation policy for the $80,000 a year person, whereas the government worker who is earning less will then, if they can't use their vacation, they'll cash it out later. Generally speaking, public workers are a phenomenal value inside of Suffolk County. I mean, you're talking less than $100 a year per tax. I guess really what it works out is per household. The average rate is under $100 a year for all of these services. 6,000 employees, 924 plus job titles across all of these different divisions and departments. All of this stuff being done at a tremendous value to the taxpayer.
Yeah, and I think of note is prior to this year, and kudos to you on an MOA that was signed for comp time, members.
Nope. Yeah, so, Nick, we've gotten into a lot of things, and, this conversation has meandered pretty much all over the place. But, a couple of things I want to talk about just internally as relates to AME. Every year we have a convention, is an internal process. All of our delegates get together, and since our inception, we've always gotten together in person because there was no COVID. Now we have COVID, and we have to make an adjustment. And in addition to that, a lot of time was spent on how can we change the rules internally? What can we change? And you've seen throughout the years, there are points in time where people are struggling to think of something that they have to change. Why? Because we've always done it. And one of the good things, I guess if you want to call it a silver lining in COVID, is it caused everybody, all businesses, to stop and think about what they're doing and why. And this year what we're doing is something completely different. We are not going to sit down in the middle of a pandemic and try and rip apart the rule book and figure out how we can, do things differently for another year before we reset the rule book again. We're going to sit down and we're going to talk with our delegates, and we're going to find out what are the issues, what's going on, what needs to change, what do we need to work on, whether it be a longstanding issue or something that cropped up because of the way 2020, unfolded. And we're going to use the resources in the room. Again, our members are the folks that run government in the 11th largest suburban economy in the continental United States. We've got very smart folks. getting them all in a room and having them talk through issues and talk through solutions, we're going to get some good answers.
Yeah, so while it's hard to say anything good came of COVID, I think there is this unique opportunity that the 2020 convention for AME will hold. Instead of it being more of a constitutional convention, we're actually going to have the ability for our experts, our leaders in government, our leaders in this union to actually communicate amongst each other and discuss what's important for this association moving forward. In the past, when talking about this rule book, for lack of better terms, we would have people want to change it every year. There'd be this part I don't like, this part I don't like. I don't know for the rank and file member if that
How many times did you change something and only to change it back the next year?
And how effective are we if we need to keep making those changes from year to year to year? I think to truly be effective and to truly serve the membership better, the concept this year that we have of team building, of training, and actually getting to hear the thoughts of everybody in the group, right? Because it was so easy in years past to be there as a delegate. You might not have spoken a word. I want to hear what that guy has to say or that woman. And now we're going to put you in a forum where we are going to hear what you have to say.
Well, it was a handful of folks that, they had something to say about everything. And so there would be other people who had good thoughts and ideas that wouldn't share them with the group because they couldn't even get to the microphone.
It's very intimidating at times, especially if there are people who speak constantly, perhaps a little bit more well-polished than the person who's never gone up to a mic before ever. This opportunity will really allow them to communicate what they think we can do, things we can improve on, things they think we're doing well already. It just enables everyone in that room to have a voice as opposed to maybe the way things have been done in the past where maybe 5 or 10, 12 people have the louder voice, the bigger voice, because those 5, 10, 12 people might not necessarily represent the needs of everybody and what they want. It might just be, hey, I want to change this thing up a little bit. And
yeah, I think it's kind of common sense at this point when you pause and you take a look at what we've done, over the years versus what do we need to do now with the way COVID has shaken out and everything else. Focusing on organizational development, I think, is probably our best path forward. To sit down and do a reset, so to speak. And say, listen, I know we've done this for 35, 36 years. This year, we're not doing it that way. We're gonna do something different. We're gonna put our heads together. We're gonna figure out what's really going on. I feel like if we had gone the traditional route and said, hey, let's change the rules, there would be a wide gamut of things that could then result in next year needing the rules changed again because you can't operate because the rules change so much. And so. When you look at private business and setting up work from home models, and you've got some very large corporations saying, listen, we're never opening up a physical location again. Our workforce is going to work from home from here on out. Others going to hybrid models where maybe once or twice a week their workforce comes in and everything else is being done remotely. People are rethinking about, what is it we've always done and why have we always done it? And in a lot of cases, we see that the answer is, we're doing this because we always did it this way. This is just the way it's done.
Yeah, and not every tradition is a good one, right? So This has been the AME tradition. Let's dig into the CMB. Let's change things up. I think it's more important at this stage of the game, again, training, communicating with each other. How many members do we have where some do have the opportunity to work remotely because maybe they're an IT person? Very important in today's day and age. We talk about frontline. I think sometimes we don't always say the IT departments, but they enable those who maybe have an illness or childcare issues to still be able to perform their functions from their home if need be. Or maybe they switch departments because they became a tracer or a 311 person. They needed IT to help transfer them over.
Sure.
So in order for our convention, back to the convention, some of our members don't understand that. They don't necessarily, we're so unique, 925 titles. We have an animal caretaker. We have a tugboat operator. Bridge operators, maintenance mechanics, IT. They're so unique. I don't know that all of our membership has a great understanding of who we all are amongst each other within those titles. Collectively. Yeah. So maybe having that understanding, having those conversations, you get a better idea of where people are coming from, why they might see things differently. I don't know. This year is a great opportunity for us to really really become one.
I think you're going to see this across the board. People are going to pivot in the world and adjust to what it is now and what it is becoming, and you know, it is an opportunity for us to all shape the future. Nick, I really want to thank you for coming down, spending some time today, and getting into some of the topics that we did. And to our listeners, we'll speak to you next week.